both gonna go. We'll be riding wildfire, riding wildfire, riding wildfire. You know what you gotta do. 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 Get wild. You ain't gotta play it cool. Get wild. Take a rocket to the moon. Get wild. Get wild. Turn up the dial. They keep coming, coming back. They keep coming, coming back to you. They keep coming, coming back.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Square Spring Podcast. It's not loud enough.
You'll be our first one. First one to introduce
the first
himself.
one doing the lead-in. All right, let's get wild. Curtis, do the lead-in. It seems to come naturally around these parts, around the SICW faithful.
So Curtis, how was your weekend, man?
It's been good. It's been good. It was full of not having to, punch anybody, beat anybody up, get beat up myself. The older I get, the more I like that opportunity to get a weekend off here and there.
You could always want to punch somebody, you just don't want to get punched back.
There you go.
Well, I mean, if you're going to punch, you always got to be ready to get punched back. Part of the fun of it.
Well, as you guys can tell, we have Curtis Wylde in the house. I wanted to get him on because there's a few things he said in Facebook land over the last couple of days, but we'll get to that later in the podcast. We always like to start off with Curtis, how long you been in the business and what got you started?
Well, broke in December of 99, so it's going on 24 years in December. What got me started was wrestling with a pillow in my grandmother's living room, watching reruns of Wrestling at the Chase, of World Class Championship Wrestling. Everything that hit St. Louis around 85 to 88 or so. Was what I was seeing somehow, some way. It found its way into my living room, and I started wrestling with pillows, and I was calling my own matches, doing my own entrance music on 8-track tapes, and trying to record it, and doing my own commentary, doing my own promos when I was about 6.
Oh my God!
What's an 8-track tape?
It's what I had. Quiet Riot's Mental Health came out in 8-track tape before it hit cassette, Daddy-o.
Damn. So, where'd you start your training at? Were you here in St. Louis, or were you somewhere else?
No, Powerhouse Championship Wrestling in Spring Valley, Illinois, under Tim Lyle, but my actual trainer was his cousin, Mr. Intensity or Mr. Electricity, Brian Dean, who was kind of a big deal, apparently. I didn't really have a whole lot of internet back then to be able to do a lot of research, but apparently it was a big deal in Las Vegas before he came here, started working with Tim. But he was kind of a drill instructor, man, and you do things 100 times and get it wrong, and then you do them 100 more times as long as you got them right, and he'd be up in your face, and the spittle would be coming out. One of those types of cats,
I've always described my training.
It was in a building that had no AC, had no heat, and the only heat that we did have was like this jet engine turbine thing that you had to fill with diesel.
Oh, nice.
Smelled horrible.
Ancient torpedo heater there.
What's that?
So that's an ancient torpedo heater.
Yeah, one of those. And I mean, the drop ceiling was falling out. It probably should have been condemned, and I don't know if that building's still standing there. It was on the main drag, though, in Spring Valley, all, 4 blocks of it.
4 blocks.
What a coincidence. Our training did get condemned.
Yeah. The first bump I actually took was in Sam DeCero's ring. I got snuck in by Rude Dog Donnie Farrell. And Rude Dog Donnie Farrell was the bald guy that looked kind of like a short, fat Stone Cold on A&E's special on the power plant, WCW's power plant.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So he snuck me up there. Well, he brought me up there to check out the school, to have a talk with Sam DeCero. Couldn't afford the school at that time, given that I was, an 18, 19-year-old kid. Didn't have a whole lot of money, and I think it was $1,000 to start off, or maybe $2,500. It was a good chunk.
Yeah.
Couldn't do that at that time, but still had that fire, still had that bug that had already bitten me when I was a kid, and I kept going, found 10 Mile School, Powerhouse Championship Wrestling, and did my training there. And between being 5 or 6 years old, wrestling with a pillow in my grandmother's living room, and training to wrestle, I was about 9 to 12 years old, in that 9 years old to 12-year-old window. So for about 3 years, I lived in Horn Lake, Mississippi, and we lived about 20 minutes away from where they did the USWA tapings. So, I mean, I got bitten by the bug when I was 5 or 6 years old, but more when I was about 9 was when the hook really set itself, because I was able to go see people like Jerry Lawler and people like Jeff Jarrett, Bill Dundee, all these guys, I mean, Dutch Mantel, all these guys that I had already been seeing on TV. I got to go see them live and in person. Got to go to the Mid-South Coliseum, the Mid-South Fair, and actually at the Mid-South Fair, they let the kids get in the ring and mess around a little bit. And
Oh, wow.
really the first time that I got into a wrestling ring was when I was about 9 years old.
So growing up, past the 6, so that 9 o'clock, not 9 o'clock, that 9-year-old Curtis, who was your favorite?
Jerry Lawler.
Jerry Lawler?
Yeah. Jerry Lawler, I mean, he was the king of Memphis at that time. This was after Elvis Presley. People before my generation would call Elvis the king of Memphis. But when I lived there, Jerry the King Lawler was the king of Memphis. He walked the streets, and he had 20 or 30 people walking with him. I actually got to go swimming with him when I was about 10, 11 years old. It was one of those things, come on down to Liberty Land or whatever the water park was in Memphis at the time, and get to swim with Jerry Lawler. And so I went down, and there was about 20 or 30 kids there, but it was more like me and Jerry Lawler walking and 20 or 30 kids behind us.
Nice.
Like I raced him on a Geronimo, which was a slide to go straight down. And I think he waited because I won, and he had the weight advantage.
That's awesome.
I can honestly say I went over on Jerry Lawler when I was 9 years old. Okay.
Yeah, I pictured you being more of a fan of the bad guys.
Well, I mean, some of the bad guys towed that line because I was really big into guys like Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yeah.
And, before he got to WWE, I saw the Coal Miner Glove match. And he wasn't my favorite in that match, So I've always leaned towards the villains. And then when Jake came over to WWE, WWF at the time, obviously, he was one of those cerebral guys, one of those guys that, and he talked about it later on, that would not yell. He would bring it down, and he would really talk to you. And then you would pay attention, because what he had to say was important. Those little things, man. I caught that shit when I was like 6. You know, I caught it, and those were the things that really stuck out to me.
I mean, that's great because you can definitely tell you are great on the mic. I mean, out of our locker room or a lot of locker rooms that I've been in, you can always tell the ones who are mic experts and the ones that don't. For I would say 2/3 of my career, I wore a mask, so I never talked on the mic. I either had a manager beside me. Unfortunately, Travis Cook was one of the managers that managed guerrilla warfare for a while. Yeah, I mean, I was never skilled on the mic, but ever since I've known you, you've always been able to grab a mic and just go to town with it. So I can see you learning from them. Jake the Snake, yeah, he was one of my favorites too growing up. I always talk about how WWF was that was my favorite as a kid growing up, but once I got into the business and before that, even wanted to get into the business, that's when I started watching more WCW because it seemed like they were more of a worker than the WWF. They were more of an entertainer.
WCW seemed like they had a little more grit.
Yeah.
They seemed like they were a little more adult orientated. So I
loved it as a kid.
What's that?
I said, and I loved it as a kid. Adult oriented.
Yeah, and I mean, we all kind of did, and ECW was coming up. I was probably 16, 17 when I first heard about ECW, and it really grabbed me because it was doing things that you couldn't see on that more family-orientated show,
Yeah. That's true. I remember in high school, it was on, and I always gravitated to my brother's friends. He's 3 years older than me, and they were all into ECW, which I didn't know anything about. I come from a split family. I was on the mother's side. My brother was on my father's side, living. And so whenever I would go over there, his friends would always be watching ECW. And even to me back then, I was probably 17, 18, 16, somewhere around that age. And I was like, holy cow, how can they be doing this? And why isn't the other companies doing this? If they can get away with it, how come the other ones weren't doing it? I had no idea that one was supposed to be PG and, WCW was more PG-13 or whatever the ratings was back then. But just to see ECW and see all the chair shots and the blood and
flaming tables. That's the first time I ever saw a flaming table. Who would light a table on fire and put a man through it? ECW did.
Right. Who would think
another
of
shot that I saw that was one of the first moments of ECW that caught me. The chairs getting tossed in the ring. Terry Funk in the middle of the ring, swinging at these chairs as they're flying into the ring, and I'm thinking to myself, Terry Funk, like the Terry Funk, and this thing is happening, and organically these people are throwing chairs in the ring. You could just tell they didn't get paid to do that. That was just the crowd going into business for themselves because they were invested, because they were involved, and that's another thing that stuck out of it. And I appreciate what you mentioned earlier about my work, how I can grab a mic and try to get a crowd invested and things like that. But that was one of the things. I mean, I'm 5'10" on a light gravity day. You know what I mean? I'm now 230 after I dropped 50 pounds. My highest weight was 283. And I realized, even in a couple of the WWE tryouts that I did, they told me straight out, you're not big enough. You're not what we're looking for because you're simply not tall enough. They didn't have me cut promos. So I knew that if I was going to do this and if I was going to do this the way that I wanted to do it, I was going to have to learn to use my charisma to my advantage. I was going to have to learn how to put words together better than some other guys. And somewhere along the way, I cultivated that. I learned how to do that. And now I can be, who I am. And people believe it because that really is who I am most of the time. When I say volatile, when the name Volatile came out, I was working as a bouncer. And I was one of the smallest bouncers all the time. But I made sure to stand out in my own particular ways, and it worked to my advantage in that situation too. So I just figured out my ways to stand out. The mic work is one of them, and that's where that was developed.
And that's good because Nate, as wrestlers, you got to stand out one way or another, kind of to be remembered. You got to have those audience members remember you and want to come back and see what's going on with you and your character, and I say that about Gary Jackson too. We had him on a few weeks ago, and Gary has made it to both shows, WWF, WCW, but I think he was in the same boat. He had the muscle, but his body frame was just a little too short than what Vince McMahon was looking for at the time.
And he's a little too quiet.
A little too quiet. That's a little bit more respectful, I would think, because we are always told, and I'm sure you're the same way. Ears open, mouth shut. You go into the locker room, you think everyone, greet them, but you don't bitch, you don't argue. Ears open, mouth shut. You do what the promoter tells you to do.
And another way to say that is you got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use your ears twice as much as you use your mouth.
Right. But I think Gary just, Gary was in the 80s when you had to be 300 plus pounds. You had to be 6'5" or 7 foot something, because he definitely has the skills. But he just, his statue wasn't as good as McMahon wanted. And nowadays he would be golden, because a lot of WWE's guys or even AEW guys are, around the 5'3", 5'5", not luchadors type style, but a quicker pace, more of a wrestler style versus a big old dummy,
Yeah. But that was the problem when I did my couple tryouts, was that they were looking at hiring guys like Nathan Jones. They were hiring Matt Morgan. Guys that were 6'10", 6'11", that I would have looked goofy being in a ring with. On the other side of the ring. Yeah, would have been an awkward situation. So, yeah, it makes sense.
How long was your training before you got your first match?
Oh, that's tough to say. Because they gave me a few shots, a few little things to do, as you do with the students on shows. So one of my first shots was a comedy gig, making fun of a guy who had left. There was heat there, and I didn't have anything to do with their heat, but I did know that I wanted a spot on a show, and they gave me a spot on a show. So I guess that fell about, 4 or 5 months into my training, and then I think my first match was close to a year, maybe.
That's what we've been getting, about a year's average with the training before they actually get you on the card, and that that's what Broadway was doing too at the time.
And then about my 3rd or 4th year, I won the light heavyweight title from Jimmy Jacobs, so I came up a little bit.
Yeah, nice. So from when you started training, from what?
In a cage match, no less.
Oh my God. Jimmy Jacobs, Nathan, he, Ring of Honor guy. He was backstage for WWE as not a booker, but like a script writer for the longest time.
He's a writer.
Yeah.
And he was planning on doing that. he was planning on doing that his whole career. I mean, most of the time that I knew him, he was either working on his homework or he was waking up because he was taking a nap because he was going to school and wrestling, and doing a good schedule as far as, wrestling, independent wrestling goes. So, yeah.
So I've told this story before, but I could never remember the wrestler's name because Tyler Black, wrestled on the same card. Well, I wrestled on the same card as Tyler Black, and I tell the story about Tyler got into it with another wrestler. Evidently, that wrestler was dating this lady, and something happened, and Tyler Black swooped in, and I guess Jimmy Jacobs was that other wrestler. I always keep forgetting his name. But so Jimmy Jacobs was confronting Tyler. Now Tyler Black is Seth Rollins now, but in the independents he was Tyler Black, and so Jacobs confronted Tyler about it, and just at that moment, she must have called or texted Tyler, and Jimmy seen it on Tyler's phone, picked it up, and launched that motherfucker across the room, and it exploded. And it was like, Jimmy Jacobs had already been to ring. Tyler Black was in Ring of Time, but I knew who they were, and knew they were going places. And just to see this go down in front of you, this was that Bobby always talks about, I always talk about, because I was the biggest guy on the card, but the refs didn't show up, so they asked, who didn't want to wrestle, who would want to be the ref that night, and I was like, fuck it, I'll do it. And so the biggest guy there was the ref for the whole card.
That's great.
Yeah.
And just for the viewers out there, that's usually not the case. Usually the refs are a little smaller than the wrestlers.
Right.
Visual effect, I do believe.
So after your training, after you get a few matches into you, what brought you down to the St. Louis area?
Almost got into a fight with CM Punk and ran scared. But when you were bringing up that fight earlier and you were like, I don't remember who it was, I was going to be like, it wasn't me. I almost fought Punk, but not Tyler Black. What brought me down here was just that my family was moving down here for business opportunities. Money was going to be better on this border than the other border of Illinois, because they were driving at the time, and oversized load escorting was leaving this side of Missouri a whole lot more than it was leaving that side of Illinois. So came over here for money, and then Wyldefyre came from Chicago down here to be with me, and the rest is kind of history as far as that's concerned. But when I got here, one of the first organizations I worked with was Mid-American Extreme, Butch Fletcher's organization there.
Okay.
And they kind of gave me a home when I first got down here. I was able to go to their school, which was like 5-10 minutes from my house. I was able to get in there, work out. I was able to use the gym to do shows, so it was a good exchange. It worked out for the both of us, and then I saw how St. Louis wrestling was. 'Cause before I got here, I was doing quite a bit of traveling. I mean, one year I did well over 100 shows in a year. I was doing triple shots almost every weekend in multiple states. So I would do like a Friday night in Wisconsin, a Saturday night in Indiana, a Sunday in Kentucky, or Illinois, Missouri would get involved in there. And I would just try to bounce back and forth, and one of those was Missouri, NWA Missouri. I did a couple shots down there, but I didn't realize what St. Louis wrestling was like. And when I got to St. Louis wrestling, I realized that this was kind of a closed circuit. They didn't like outsiders around here. If you trained elsewhere, if you weren't one of the homegrown boys, you weren't in those inner circles. So, man, I just kept on trucking and being myself and staying true to myself, not screwing anybody, not trying to get any heat, and doing the best job I could do. to be, I say don't be the best, be the only. I was just trying to be the only Curtis Wylde in St. Louis, and eventually I think that people started to see me as a local, but it took a while. It took a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys still don't.
What's
I know
your
Bobby saw me around the St. Louis area before he started training. He told me that not too long ago.
I did.
Yeah, at the I think it was the Belclair Fairgrounds. We had somebody come out with a horse. They did an entrance with a horse, and I was wrestling on that show. Greg the Hammer Valentine was there. Bob was there, or maybe it was Texan that told me.
Was
that.
it Steve Montana that came out on the horse?
Sounds
I
familiar.
think it was Steve Montana that came out.
Yeah, and it was on a dirt racetrack, except our locker room was a camper that was pulled up onto the racetrack, and then the ring was like next to it. And
Yep.
I think Texan was at that show with me.
Yeah,
I think
it
I was
was.
with Texan.
you guys might have went to it together. Maybe that's why I'm getting it confused. You told me that recently.
I always joke about that too. Man, you won't believe where some, like even I, the building would have the show inside, but you didn't have a locker room. Your locker room was outside. Hopefully your car had tinted windows so you can change, or sometimes you didn't even have that. Sometimes it was just back behind the building changing real quick, and that way you can go into the building. I mean, it's crazy what you go through when you're first going out, or if you don't have a promotion that's big enough to where they have pool, or get the better buildings, ones with the locker rooms, and some of these other promotions.
I remember doing a show in the parking lot of a strip club, man, when I was young. I'm not even kidding at all. I also did a show right next to a pavilion. It was during like a county fair or something. It was right next to a pavilion, and our locker room was a camper, but it wasn't a big camper. It was like a one-bedroom camper with a little living room area in the middle and the driver's section. I mean, and we had like probably 25 guys on this show, So that's
When we wrestled in Greenville, we
the
had a nice
glamour that few people don't see. That's that's the glitz and the glamour that the viewers aren't even aware of.
So that particular show that you're talking about, that someone rode off and came to the ring in a horse, and Greg the Hammer Valentine was on that show. Bob Orton was on that show. Is this? It was a cage match, and this cage was literally, it looked like it was duct taped together because it not high-end material. But it's funny because now that I hang out with Bob a lot, when we were in the audience, they announced what the next match was going to be. They said, we had to give them some time to put the put the cage together, and you're waiting, and then cage is up, still waiting. Greg the Hammer Valentine is in the cage, you're still waiting. And then all of a sudden you see this car go around the outside and then come up through the field and then go into where the cage was, and Bob comes out, Bob Orton Jr. comes out. And then, they start wrestling like right away. There was no, he gets out of the car, he just got out of the car, went to the ring, and started wrestling Greg the Hammer Valentine. Now, the part that I find out later is that Bob had forgot the show was supposed to be that night. He had already started drinking and just said, fuck it. And then someone kept calling him and saying, you got a show tonight. And he was like, no, yeah, it's okay. And then Greg the Hammer Valentine calls him up and says, hey, bud, you're supposed to be wrestling me tonight. You go, oh, okay, I'll be right there.
Let me get my shoes on, brother.
So it's funny seeing things from an audience perspective, and then finding out the true what went on behind the scenes. Totally funny. It's totally funny to me. What's your connection?
Chicken wire.
It looked like it was just fencing, but it was. I would have to say it looked like they just duct taped the ends of the fence together, so it would be up in like a cage form. I mean,
I think I might still have some of that footage around somewhere.
It didn't help either, though. It didn't help either. While they were trying to put it up, another match came out that ended up wrestling in the cage, and the guy was climbing the outside of the cage to get into the ring while they're trying to assemble it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember who that was, but I do remember that.
As soon as he did it, that whole corner just went whoop.
What is your connection with GCW?
GCW, we had a love-hate relationship. When I first got to St. Louis, Ben didn't want a whole lot to do with me. I was an outsider. I wasn't a homegrown. I wasn't one of his guys. And that's how it was here in St. Louis, if we're not one of their guys, Eventually, our relationship got a little better. Sean Vincent at the time and I were having some matches at Mid-American Extreme at Max, and Ben saw what we were doing there, liked it, and I was fortunate enough to do a couple shows with GCW before that was all said and done. So that's really my history with GCW. I went and trained a lot with their guys when I first got in town, and South Broadway, went down there, trained, any ring time that I could get at that time, like a young comedian, and you guys know this firsthand, any time that you could get some time in the ring was a good time. You try new things, got to hone old things, and, just better your craft.
Yep. So when was your first match with SICW?
That
was it when it was combined with Broad?
9 years ago? No, this was after, I think it may have been around, I wrestled at Broadway before I wrestled at SICW for a period of time. Chrissy trained at Wyldefyre, most of the viewers know, trained at Broadway, and I actually had a broken foot when we started that relationship. So I was getting in the ring on an air cast. And helping her train. Gary Jackson was there a lot. Philly Blunt was there a lot. Sean Vincent was there a lot. But, and Gary Jackson and myself and Sean Vincent are who Wyldefyre really credits with, getting her through that. And then she actually had her first match at Broadway before I did, because I had a broken foot. So we both did that. That relationship went south on a miscommunication. I was supposed to be on a show as Wild Child, but apparently before that there was a Wild Child Billy Diamond, and Tony Costa booked us for a show together where she was going to be my manager. We were going to do that whole thing, and then whoever got the booking sheet was apparently told Wild Child, and they put Billy Diamond in my place. And I think that Tony thought that I no-showed a show that I thought that I wasn't booked on, and that's how that relationship went south early. But the SICW thing came about. I had taken almost 5 years off. Wasn't really planning on getting back into it. Didn't think that my body had a whole lot left. Sean Vincent actually went to Herb Simmons when Sean Vincent was the ambassador, when he was a fan favorite, and said, hey, this guy's still got some in the tank, and I didn't even know if I had any in the tank. And then I was very honest with Herb. I said, I may only have 3 or 4 matches left in me. I really don't know. And that was over 8 years ago. I think that it was 2014, 2015 when we first started our relationship, SICW and the Wild Side, and it's been a rocky road. And there's been some definite hate when I was a thorn in Herb's side, and now there's some definite love. The fans are getting wild and knowing that they're wild and staying wild, and I'm digging every minute of that.
Right.
So the SICW has been has been, in some ways, my second chance at this, because I walked away. I was ready to just enjoy life, mosey off into the sunset. But I knew that you're only as good as your last match. And I always knew that I was better than my last match.
That's
So I'm
great.
glad that Herb gave me the opportunity to come back to prove that over and over and over again. I'd like to think. And I think that a lot of the audience would approve and agree.
Yeah. I'm going to take you to New Breed in a little bit, but I want to know, you get a shot at the WWE. How did you said a few times, how many actual tryouts did you go to? What was the time frame, or where were you at that you had these shots?
Chicago. I was in the Chicagoland area. That's where my primary home was. LaSalle, Spring Valley, Peatone, that northern Illinois region. And I was also doing some work with a company. I honestly don't remember their call letters.
Sure.
It was on 101st in Halsted. And a lot of guys like Willie DeBomb, Richardson were up there, and the guy who actually introduced myself in Wildfire, Tristan Hayes, was up there. Not Christian Hayes, who would be confused with the St. Louis crowd. Tristan Hayes. And he introduced me in Wildfire, and his fiance was actually going to high school with Wildfire at the time. They were going to high school together, and I was the paid chauffeur to take her to her prom.
Oh, wow.
And, things progressed, and I put my charisma to work, and before you know it, she gets deep.
All right, so how did you get to try out?
Oh, one of the shows was a paid tryout type thing where I don't remember if it was $150, $250, something like that. Tom Pritchard was a scout for the WWE at the time, Dr. Tom Pritchard, and he came to see us all. And I was actually at one of the early tryouts with Colt Cabana.
Oh, wow.
The first time I met Colt Cabana, funny story for your viewers, I walked up to him in the locker room, and his shoulder is about a foot taller than mine, so I'm just looking up at him, and in between me and his face are his nipples. I started tweaking his nipples, grabbing hold of his nipples, right? He goes, "Those are mine." I said, "Not anymore."
Oh, my God.
That's nothing that would come to my mind. Let's grab another man's nipples in the locker room.
You got to make an impression.
That's a good way to
Never
do it.
forget it.
I bet he didn't.
So, Nate,
I almost
Colt
ended up fighting with
Cabana.
his best friend. And,
I was just going to lead into that.
The other one was an Al Snow thing, where Al Snow was going to be on the show, and he was scouting talent, that type of thing, and he took the time after our matches to pull everybody aside, let them know what they needed to work on, let them know. But I don't think anybody got hired off of that one. I think that there might have been some interest in Colt off of the first one. There were a few other guys. A guy named Strychnine, not Nicky Strychnine of the CW notoriety, but a guy named Strychnine who was about 6'6". He was jacked. He had that look that they were looking for. I think he got some tryouts off of it. And another guy, if Wildfire was in here, she's got the kids in the other room, but she could tell me the guy's name. He was under a mask. His shoe name's Robbie. I want to say it wasn't El Generico, but it was definitely around that same time, and he got some tryouts off of that too. Some further attention off of.
Yeah, there you go.
They had him come to shows and do some dark match stuff, but I never got those opportunities. The dark match opportunities, never got those. Not sure it would have helped me anyway, unless they let me cut a promo.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah, I always kind of WWE was never my goal. Like when I got in originally, I saw in World Class Championship Wrestling. I saw USWA's TV tapings. ECW really struck me when I got even older, and so I never wanted that clean cut product. I wanted something with a little grit, a little grind, something that was a little more on the dirty side. And I think that what I've done with my career has somehow, some way achieved that. So I don't think that the cartoon world of WWE would have been good for me.
Yeah.
And nor did we had a family in mind. So nor did we want to travel 300 days a year. We wanted to raise some kids, and we wanted to do it not out of hotel rooms.
That's true. I mean, that's that's why I stayed in this area, because I started having kids at a young age.
Yeah.
But
Your youngest boy's about, like, what, 30? Damn well looks it.
yeah, well. Colt Cabana, Nate, was CM Punk's best friend, but now they're kind of at odds, and have been for a while.
Yeah.
Tell me the story of how you almost got in a fight with CM Punk.
Well, we were at a show in upstate Chicago, or upstate Illinois, and after the show, I mentioned to a couple other guys, hey, you think Punk would want to go to the bar? Because we were going to go to a bar afterwards. And they're like, oh, no, he's straight edge. Like, we're not even going to ask him. I was like, I'll ask him. So I walk up and, hey, you want to go out to the bar with us? And he looks at me and he goes, read my knuckles. And I found out afterwards that he has drug-free tattooed across his knuckles. But I didn't even look at his knuckles. I just locked eyes with him. So I'm not reading your knuckles, man. Do you want to go to the bar with some of the boys after the show? And he slams his fist together again. Read my knuckles. So I fucking slapped his fist out. Sorry, I don't know if this is supposed to be clean. You might have to beat and fix that.
You're fine.
So
Say whatever you want.
Knuckles out of my face. And before you know it, he's trying to puff up on me, and I'm trying to jump over the people that are getting in between us. And there was definitely a big pull apart. And that's why when he went into the UFC, I knew that he was going to shame our business and embarrass himself, because those guys have been fighting forever. And I was in a bar with him. I saw fear in that guy's eyes. So he's on a big stage like the UFC. I knew he was going to get mauled, dude. And the fact he did it by Mickey Gall, who was, 1-0 or 0-1, was even more embarrassing. And I saw it coming. I spoke about it publicly, and he did it anyway. And I thought it was highly unfortunate, because you got him in WWE, and he's beating guys like The Undertaker. He's beating guys like Triple H. He's beating all these guys, The Rock. And then he goes and gets mauled by a 180-pound kid, because that 180-pound kid has been training his whole life. And CM Punk just wanted to do it because he thought he was a tough guy and wasn't.
Yeah.
But
you didn't read his knuckles, so.
Yeah, I didn't read his knuckles. I found out later about the tattoo. Almost got into a
Turns
fight
out
with
his knuckles
Virgil.
have nothing to do with the beer anyway.
Almost got into a fight with Virgil too once, because he was being very negative towards the organization. I was wrestling 3 days in a row at the Wizard World Comic Convention at what was formerly known as the Rosemont Horizon. It was something else by that time. And Virgil came over and just started talking smack about how the ring was unsafe and how none of this looked like wrestling, and he was just trying to run everybody down. And I took umbrance to him being negative to what was my home fed at the time, and there was a little pull apart with me and Virgil too.
Wow.
However, years later, I did a show with him up in upstate Indiana, Heroes and Legends show, and he happened to be there with like 30 or 40 other Heroes and Legends. And I did apologize to him, because in all honesty, he was right. It was a dangerous ring. And it took, a little experience and a little maturity to get that.
I understand. I've been in a bunch of rings myself that now, the shape that my body and my injuries, I wouldn't wrestle in nowadays.
Yeah.
So, but back then, you're gung ho. If there was a ring, if there was a ring, let's do it.
If we don't even need a ring. We don't even need a ring. Put up 4 posts and 3 ropes, and we got it.
I said that, but I keep seeing these highlights of him and Attila, and they're never in a ring anyway. They're always on the floor.
He's got a point. He's got a point there, man.
Most times we start off in the ring. We just
Sure, says
make
you.
our way out of the ring.
We're having to pull you apart in the locker room before the show even starts. I'm telling you, that's why we need separate locker rooms for cats like you. We need to go back to that. When I first started, it was separate locker rooms. The heels were in one locker room, faces were in another locker room. Now we got some separation back there, but I don't think that there's enough. Like there's, separators, but you and Attila pass each other on the way to the bathroom and things happen. Same with me and the Hustlers. So I think that, I don't know, maybe we should heighten security a little bit so we don't give away the show for free for the locker room.
There you go. Nate, you're now a security guard.
Herb won't let me in the locker room because of the cameras.
Yeah, that makes
Well, leave the cameras at the door and just be security.
I'll come in there.
it makes sense, though. I mean, I know that Herb has his reasons, but you don't want the TV getting out before the TV hits the TV, right? And that's hard for some of us, because when big things happen, you really want to talk that smack, and you can't let people know,
Right.
That's the nature of TV taping.
I want to bring the smack to the podcast too, but it's really hard to align with all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I think if we ever brought Attila on, it would either be me deleting him or me just walking out. I would say my piece and just walk out.
Well, I was hoping Bobby was going to do that to Sean Vincent when he was on, but he didn't do it.
Oh, I just figured it would be right if I walked out on the show.
No, you kicked him out because you can do it on yours too.
I didn't think I had that access. I'll have to remember that next time.
I don't know. I got a leave button.
Right. So I wanted to talk about the time period, which was not too long ago, where you were the SICW champion, and then you started working for New Breed, and you became the champion there. You actually held 2 belts over there at the same time. 3 belts over there?
Well, no, I held 2 belts at New Breed at the same time, but there was a time when I had South Broadway, the SICW, and the New Breed title at the same time.
I remember those chant promos.
Yeah. And
So,
that's what I mean, man. If I wouldn't have came back to wrestling, if I wouldn't have came back to SICW, I wouldn't have been able to live out that story. And that's what my whole wrestling career has been, is just one big story. And I think that was a really cool chapter to be able to add to that.
Yeah, because that was prominently the 3 biggest organizations around here, and you were the champion of all 3 of them.
I'm not sure how I pulled it off. I'm not sure how I pulled it off. But I will say that when you get in that situation, difficulties arise. Difficulties arise because not all places, want to work as well with everyone involved, and even just lining up something as simple as lining up the dates to make sure that I was able to make all the shows and things.
You're right.
It was.
Well, I always figured too, you got 3 locker rooms of guys going after you, and like Bobby always states, it's easy to go after the title and win it, but it's harder to defend it because you got so many people that are trying to climb that ladder.
Yeah.
And you had 3 locker rooms going after you. So
and they all have different personalities and different guys in there that may have been former champions and may, want that shot and may want that spotlight, so to speak. And, it is a situation where guys start looking at you a little side-eyed, even if you think they're friends. Start looking at you a little side-eyed, like, now when's my opportunity? When's my shot?
Everybody wants to
it had to be.
What's that?
it had to be the best time of your life, but at the same time, like almost like not the worst time of your life, but like you always got to watch behind your back, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Luckily, I had another set of eyes. Wildfire would watch my back pretty well. But yeah, I always had to be on the lookout. And I know that a couple years ago, I was on a podcast with Shaft, and he mentioned that he was the champion when SICW and MMWA, South Broadway, were together. He was their champion. So he was the MMWA SICW heavyweight champion. And he's like, so you're doing kind of the same thing I was doing. I was like, yeah, but now it's separate. I'm on two separate shows. I have two separate locker rooms, and I'm having to balance this thing two separate ways, you know? So it was an interesting time, man, and it's one that I'm glad happened, that I appreciate. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it up to that. That's probably my peak. I'll be honest. I mean, how am I ever going to work that thing out again?
Right.
And it worked out because I was just the right guy at the right time, telling the right stories, and that's why that happens. It didn't have a whole lot to do with I don't want to say my athletic ability or prowess. It was just the story worked. And was able to line up for me to be able to, have those accolades and win those titles when the time was right. When I saw the opportunity to take it, and I did. Every time that I was throwing a ball, I ran with it as hard and as fast as I possibly could. And that's the only thing anybody can ask us to do in this business.
So true. If you're given the ball, you got to run with it.
Absolutely.
So I assume that's one of your greatest highlights, but last year, you had said it before that one of your idols was Jerry the King Lawler, and last year at the MAC, you got to not say work a program with him, but you got to work with him that night. How did that? Where is that on your scale of
just short of wrestling him? I mean, it directly underneath it by a hair, because that was all story too. That was me coming out. I had Wildfire on one side. I had Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart on the other at the Missouri Athletic Club. Chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, big screen going on. You know, we got Cowboy Bob Warden in the locker room, and we had. Who else was there? I think
Sergeant Slaughter was there.
Sergeant Slaughter was there. So all these guys were there, and I'm out there with Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart, Wildfire, my wife. Everybody knows, real life wife. And then I got Jerry the King Lawler on the opposite side of the ring, and I was able to, do what I do on the microphone, talk a little smack. Take names, and then he wound up that right hand, and I saw the lights temporarily. I jumped right back up because you can't keep a wild man down. But
let's just preference that was before the change.
He said that was the hardest that he had hit anybody since Andy Kaufman. And I kind of thought he was blowing smoke, but then I saw him out at Cauliflower Alley Club in Las Vegas. And he was sitting with Dangerous Doug Gilbert, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert's brother. And he told that I walked up, I said hi, and unsolicited, he looked at Dangerous Doug Gilbert, and he's like, I punched this kid harder than I punched anybody since Andy Kaufman. I was like, oh. So now he's spreading the news. It must have not just been smoke he was blowing,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So run me over your top 5 things that's happened to you in the as being a wrestler. 5 of your top highlights.
5 of my top highlights. I'd have to say winning my first light heavyweight title from Jimmy Jacobs. At the time, I didn't know that the kid was going to go on to do much big, but I did know that he was dedicated and that he knew psychology, and a lot of guys didn't, especially at his age, because he was a young guy at that time. He was maybe 15, 16. I mean, he was fairly old enough to be doing it, and so that was number 1. Let's see, number 2. I don't know if it's one of my highlights or one of my regrets, the CM Punk thing, because I really regret that I didn't actually get to it. So I think that probably would have made some highlights. And at least I would have always known, even if I stayed where I'm at and he went on to do the bigger stuff that he did, the WrestleManias and all that, I would have always known that I kicked his ass if I would have actually gotten to him that day. So and that's one of my, highlights because it was a pull apart with somebody so well known, but it was one of my regrets because I didn't get my hands on it. Some of my highlights are kind of in groupings. So I'm proud of some of the buildings and shows that I've been able to be a part of, like the Wizard World Comic Convention. That particular show, I was able to meet Lou Ferrigno. I was able to meet Chewbacca, hang out with all kinds of, comic convention type people, and that was a good time. Also wrestling at the Rosemount, what was formerly the Rosemount Horizon, that was kind of a big deal at that time. This was like 2004, 2005. And so that was a big deal. But then you come down here years later and you're looking at having the first match. I had the first match with Waco. I don't know how that guy got so lucky because he did some history making with me twice. But Waco, we had the very first match ever at the Missouri Art Museum. The History Museum, right?
Yeah, the History
Museum. First match ever, first pro wrestling match ever there. We were in the first pro wrestling match ever at the Shriners show. And then the shows that we've had at the Missouri Athletic Club, those are big deals because they just seem like such galas. So I guess all of that would kind of tie for number 3. And then the first time that I won a heavyweight title was kind of a big deal for me because Jerry Lynn was on that show. Eric Freedom was on that show. I looked up to Eric Freedom a lot because he was one of the first guys that wasn't a real asshole to me, that tried to give me advice, tried to kind of bring me under his wing and steer me right, and not be mean about it and not be really egotistical about it. And it worked. I will say, though, that my training, I had a chip on my shoulder. I mentioned the Volatile thing wasn't just a gimmick. I had a chip on my shoulder when I first started training. I had a problem with authority. I got into a lot of fights at that time, and it really didn't matter with who. So if I didn't have that drill instructor kind of training, wrestling never would have got through to me. So I don't fault anybody for that because it worked for me. It might not work for everybody. It might not work these days, but it worked for me. And then Eric Freedom was there, so he gave me a little speech about how, now I was the guy who was supposed to carry the company, and it really, really struck true to my heart, that this was something that was being bestowed on me, and it really rang true because for like the next year, maybe year plus, I was the champion, and I was. The main event, I was the guy that they were putting on all the posters and things like that. And it may have been a little early in my career for me to really appreciate it as much as I should have, but that's definitely one of my highlights is getting that first rub to say, you're the guy, we believe in you, take this ball and run with it. And then my other highlight has to be the winning the SICW title and then going on to have 3 major titles of all 3 major organizations in the area.
Your story almost just like Randy Orton's, because if you ever hear him talking about his first title run, he'll tell you he wasn't ready. He was pretty mischievous in the locker room, almost getting kicked out from time to time. Sent home packing. They actually, you're suspended for a while, and and then he looks back at it. It's like, man, they gave me everything, but I was too young and dumb, and I didn't, hold it with honor or cherish it with honor like I should have. So, I mean, you're not the only one that's been that way, and he's gone on and done great things too. Hopefully he comes back soon, Bob, he keeps telling me, oh, he's in the gym, he's lifting weights, he's working out, and the comeback from a back surgery is pretty big when you're dealing with wrestling because you're constantly getting slammed on your back, and then it's one of the first things that normally goes out. Nate, that's why we say everyone's got a bump card, because there's only so many times you can bump on that back before that back says I'm done.
Yeah.
So to come back from a back surgery, I mean, it's going to be amazing if he does. Bob said that he's not 100% yet, and there's still I'm thinking there's still a deal to be made before he fully commits to coming back, but kind of crazy.
I think that that was horrible timing because he was right at that time where he was at his peak, man. He was peak Orton. He was Orton Alpha, and there was just nothing he was doing wrong. Everything he was doing was crisp, was hidden. A lot like if you look over, I saw clips. I don't watch a lot of AEW, but I saw clips of Dustin Rhodes before I guess he slowed down over there recently, or maybe he lost a retirement match or something. I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot of him, but there was a time when I was seeing Dustin Rhodes clips, and he was hitting everything just like that, man. Him and Randy Orton, I thought were on top of their game around the same time, maybe.
Yeah, so
I think a lot of those two they were just having fun again. Like they were doing what they loved and not being told what to do.
Yeah. I think that really rings true because I think a lot of guys enjoy this a whole lot better when they're in that position, when they have the freedom of expression that is required in this business. Because all the greats, you can't script all the greats that came along. Those guys came up with that stuff. I mean, of course, they had writers, but they had to go out and deliver it. Freddie Blassie or somebody like that. They had to go out and they had to deliver it right in front of the audience. Who was the guy that Hogan and Steiner molded themselves after? He took a lot of steroids. He's in a wheelchair.
Oh, man, he's just been in
Superstar Grant.
He's just been in the news here lately because his health is failing so bad.
Yeah. But you look at guys like him, and you couldn't have paid someone else to be that good. You know what I mean? You had to find the right cats that could have that creative freedom, and then make it work for them, make it work for you financially. But back then it was a time when if it didn't make sense, it didn't make dollars, and now they make enough dollars off of merchandise sales and TV deals that they don't have.
It doesn't even make sense anymore.
Right. That's why what we do is so important, because if fans want to see something that makes sense, see something they can wrap their hands around, get engaged in, get involved in, they can come to an SICW show. They can put down $12 or $15, and they're going to see a better show live in person than they're going to see on television, or if they're going to pay for a pay-per-view. Or I guess Peacock. If you get the Peacock, you get them for free now. So, but
that might be up in the air pretty soon.
Yeah, who knows with Endeavor, because UFC's pay-per-views are like $60 or something.
Right, and that's what they're talking about now, that since they're under that parent group, that they might end that whole... I mean, they'll keep the Peacock, they'll keep the history, and the day after, reruns, but the actual pay-per-view, about pulling the pay-per-views and going back to, you having to buy it once a month.
Yeah. I mean, if it's working with the UFC, there's no reason for them not to try that. But I think that fans have already been conditioned to, pay their $5 a month or whatever Peacock is now, and tune in when they're able to and catch it streaming. And I think that the pay-per-view model is old and passe. But if they're still pulling it off with the UFC and making decent money doing it, let them. Hopefully we can start getting some guys that are getting the payouts that some of the top UFC guys get. But if a lot of guys in WWE start getting the payouts that bottom UFC guys get, there's going to be a huge uproar in the industry. because that's going to bring everybody's pay down across companies.
I think I spoke about this last week. I hope they just keep it separate entities, because I bring up the fact that we know WWE is sports entertainment, and we know UFC is real, and I don't want them to blur the lines to where you start thinking, "Oh, this UFC shit is not real," and I know that we've had some crossovers with Brock and, with, Dan Severn and Shamrock and Punk. And I think it's
the last
different.
guys, if he ever gets out of the murder charge or attempted murder charge.
Right.
Kane the last one.
I think it's different when they come from UFC over, because you know that they're such a badass in UFC, and it's just going to elevate the WWE product.
Yeah.
But I don't think the WWE product can elevate the UFC. I think it'll be just the opposite for the UFC.
Yeah, I don't think that they should do talent swaps. And the only way I think a guy from WWE should go over to UFC is if he can really legitimately hold his own and conduct business in the honor and keep the honor of pro wrestling in mind.
Right.
And I don't see too many guys. Although, before I speak too soon, John Morrison had a good outing on a boxing match recently.
I was just going to say that,
But that's a different kind of cat. He's deep into the martial arts. Instead of going to the gym most of the time, he goes and finds a parkour park and goes and gets his workout off that way. Have you seen some of the Bad in the Sun videos with him in it?
I have, and it's
from time
crazy.
to time. It's amazing. He does a great job with it. From time to time, he'll play Casey Jones, or he'll play, Scorpion, or somebody like that. And it's all superhero based. So it might be Wolverine versus Nightwing, Batman versus Superman. All kinds of different matchups. So if you haven't seen it, Bat in the Sun.
Nate, you had seen something on Facebook that you wanted to talk to him about.
Yeah, you had mentioned it earlier, but way too early in the podcast for me to bring it up. But on Facebook, you put that you're in the twilight of your career. You said that 8 years ago.
Yeah.
How many shows do you think you have, and why do you feel that you're getting towards the end?
Well, the bump card is a very real thing, man, and I'm getting real close to the area that I thought I was when I got back with Herb. Now I'm getting closer to knowing it. I am 43 years old now, just had a birthday, and I got a couple of kids I want to be, here for, and you got guys like LA Hustlers running around and hurting legs. That could have been a broken leg. I mean, luckily it was not quite a break, but if that put me out, then it's Wildfire's carrying in the groceries. And I'm having to be here for my family, and the way that I can know that I can do that is if I walk away from this business instead of being rolled away.
How long do you think you have?
Man, that's going to be tough to say. I do know that I plan to stick around for a good final chapter. So we're going to see what kind of story I can tell on the way out. But like I mentioned earlier, my whole career has been story-based. And if it doesn't make sense, then it was something that I always try to steer away from. I say if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make dollars. But it was more about the making sense for me. It just needed to make sense. And this final chapter, I'm going to do the best I can do to honor the fans' memory of me, and hope that I can have, like I said earlier, you're only as good as your last match, and I hope that I can prove on the way out that my career wasn't a waste, and I was able to tell good stories and make memories. And like we mentioned earlier, and I say all the time, we're not in the wrestling business. We're in the memory creation business. And I'll stick around long enough to create, a good memory to leave the fans with. None of us can do this forever, and we all got to realize that. And the thing is, like, that the fans are really behind me right now. I'm really with the fans right now. So this is really a great time in my career. I mean, I've probably never been as popular as I am right now. I've been close. But I mean, right now they're chanting "Let's get wild" as I'm coming out. They're chanting "We got wild" as I finish doing what I'm doing out there. They're chanting "We are wild" because they're connecting with us so much, man. So it's going to be hard to walk away when it happens. But I'd really like to, they say it's better to burn out than fade away, and I'd really like to go out before those chants start getting quieter.
Yeah.
Are you going to be involved in wrestling on the production side when you're done with the wrestling side, or when you walk away, are you completely done?
We'll see what happens. I do know that I'm looking forward to, and I do still have some interests going on in New Breed, but I do know that I want my final matches to be in SICW just because of the opportunity that Herb gave me to tell this final story. To tell this second half of the book, really. And I want to be able to be sure to give what I have left at the very end to SICW and to the SICW faithful. So when it happens, I hope that everybody's there and that it was a great story heading into whatever we end up doing. But everybody's time comes, and
I think that's the hardest part there is finding out or realizing when it's time to head out. Because I've had some pretty serious injuries where I could have hung up, but you get that itch, or sometimes, I mean, when I hurt my back, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to come back. Even realizing how stupid that probably was, but there was no doubt in my mind. But more props to you if you can convince yourself that you're done. Because I know it's going to be a lot of convincing, because there's something about wrestling, and I don't think it's like this in all the other sports. But there's something about wrestling that wants to pull you back in, and you kind of need it. So, I mean, if you can...
Well, I will say, and you're right, it's like a drug. It is really like a drug, and you get addicted. You get hooked. And there's nothing else in this world like it, man. I've DJ'd wedding receptions with almost 1,000 people in the room. I was a manager of a band. I've done politics. I've been at political rallies. I've done all of these things that would give people such a high, and none of it touched pro wrestling. So I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be absolutely difficult, but I do know that you got to listen to your body. You got to, make the right moves for you and your family. And I think that when I do hang it up, to kind of answer your question a little bit, I'm probably not going to unretire. I'm probably not going to come out of retirement and have another match after that. When I hang it up in the ring, I'm going to hang it up in the ring. Now, can I bring value outside of the ring on wrestling shows? I'm positive of that. I think that everybody that works with me would agree with that.
You'd be a great mouthpiece manager.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I also think I come in handy in backstage scenarios, backstage situations, and on the giving back aspect. If I'm able to make it to shows early enough to be able to train guys in some of the details, and try to help out the next generation as much as I can, I think that I'm going to look for those opportunities, because I do still want to give back to this business. It did give me a lot. It has given me a lot of memories. I don't just want to walk away. I think for a period of time, maybe you got to detox a little bit. But then A lot of my mindset really goes back to that 5 or 6 year old kid, because if I wasn't playing with the pillow in my grandmother's living room, I would be doing my own wrestling cards, a whole show with my action figures, and I would have my ring. I went through a few different variations of a ring, from the old WWE plastic rings to like using an actual canvas, because I would hear on the TV, oh, he slammed him on the canvas. So I got a canvas, and my action figures would play on this canvas. We would have wrestling matches, and I would set up my whole show. I would have my luchadors or my cruiserweight match, and then I would have my guys trying to make it type match, and then a tag match, and then the intercontinental type of match, and my heavyweights. And I built cards when I was 5 or 6 years old. I was doing what people would call the book. I was doing the storylines, and they were storylines that only existed in my own mind. But I've always been, the creative aspect has always been something that reached out to me. And even in my break from pro wrestling, I wrote some screenplays, just because that creative aspect was still speaking to me. And I think that's probably going to be the case after I get out. I'll be honest, I'm already thinking of, maybe 5 years down the road, doing some sort of a Curtis Wylde Invitational, and bringing some guys in and doing maybe a one-off show and giving some sort of a trophy, maybe a smaller version of that one he's got over his shoulder back there, Bobby D.
Wild time.
Well, speaking of that,
Wylde Invitational,
you were
would be invited.
well. Speaking of that trophy behind his shoulder, you carried that trophy too. Matter of fact, you carried it to different states.
Yeah.
Because didn't you take that to Vegas too?
Yeah, took it out to. I took it to multiple different places. I took it to DC. I took it to Vegas. I took it to, I think, San Francisco. I was doing quite the ride on a whole nother situation that starts with a P at that time, and I was traveling quite a bit for Hellraiser circumstances, to try to
understand.
Yeah. So was doing that. I had the opportunity to do that. The fans didn't like it at that time. I kind of understand. I was living a little jet set lifestyle, so I get it. But yeah, they would chant "Sippy Cup" on my way to the ring, and then they actually started bringing sippy cups and throwing them in the ring. But looking back, that's all part of the engagement, man. They came out to get involved. They came out to get involved. They got involved, and luckily, I was able to be the cat that was getting involved with them. So, looking back, it might have made me mad at that time. I mean, I stepped on a couple sippy cups and almost twisted my ankle. But looking back, I wouldn't give stuff like that back, man. I mean, there's so many things that the fans did organically that, looking back, is amazing that they had those reactions to what we were doing.
I would say
you get sippy cups.
That's right. You put margarita in the trophy and drink from it. And,
I would say if you got the fans to hate you or love you, you are in their mind and you got them thinking about you either way. So either way, you connected on some sort of level.
And I think the important thing to draw from, as I look back and as I look over my career, the important thing that I draw from is that not only were there times that they hated me, not only were there times that they loved me, but when it happened, it really happened. They really hated me. They really loved me. There wasn't an in-between. There was no gray area. And that's what made the ride so much more fun.
Yeah.
They were invested, man. And there's been times that I've had fans try to fight me after shows because they hated what I was doing to their heroes. Those are just things that you have to compete with, and things that when it's happening, you're like, yeah, this is how it was in the 70s. you know?
So let me ask you, what is left on the Curtis Wylde bucket list before he does hang it up? Is there something that you have to do before you can sail off to the sunset?
Well, I don't know that I've put a whole lot of thought into that in detail. I do know that I appreciate the story we've told and where the book has progressed into today. But heading out, some of the things I'd really like to do. Jerry Lawler, if you're listening, I got one more in me for you. We could do this. It could be in Memphis. It could be in St. Louis. It could be May 13th at the Aviator Hotel. We can do it wherever, as long as you're healthy, as long as you're in good shape. As a consolation prize, I wouldn't mind Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett could step into that Lawler role for me for that one final outage. As far as another guy, a bucket list guy, HBK was always a bucket list guy for me. But he was a bucket list guy if he was in his prime and I was in my prime. No other way. Because any other way, I wouldn't be happy with what came from it, and he wouldn't either. But I think that both of us in our prime could have put on a real good match, and that's something that I've always wanted to do, regretted that I would never do, and that's one of those bucket list guys. Bucket list thing, I mean, I don't think there's time for it, man, but doing that champ thing was a pretty good time. Pulling that thing off again would be great. But
Well, nowadays you gotta get promotions to actually work together.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Herb who's willing to work with everyone, but you got other ones that won't work with Herb. So
What happens? They do ego first, and their only basis is money and ego.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, somewhere along the line, they're going to realize that ego doesn't serve them in this business. Because you're only as good as the guy in the ring with you.
right.
It doesn't matter how good you are. On any given day, the guy across the ring from you can make you suck. And he's got that power in reverse. So to get an ego in this business, I think, is ridiculous. I think that when I first got to St. Louis, maybe the rumor got around that I had an ego, but that was probably coming from a whole lot of people that had never talked to me and only knew that I was coming from the Chicago area. So I mean, Chicago had its own vices and way that people took Chicago. That was a hard place to break into. If you weren't a Chicago boy, if you weren't friends with somebody up there that you knew, then it was hard to break in. And the only reason I was able to get up there is because I was a madman about sending out VHS tapes. You used to be able to get boxes from the post office that was VHS, perfect size for a VHS tape. And so I would get that. I would put that in 8x10 and a resume in a box, in the VHS box, and I would send out about 3 or 4 of those a week, every week.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, I mean, I was putting in the work to be able to get those bookings in multiple states and doing triple shot weekends and stuff. But then, I got up to the Chicagoland area and earned their respect by doing the best I could do. And the same way that I did it in St. Louis was just doing the best job I could do on the shows that I was on, doing what I was asked to the best of my ability and making it as memorable as possible. And so I think that I eventually earned respect in the Chicagoland area, eventually earned respect in St. Louis, and for that I'll always be grateful, but no part of me will always know that I put in that work. I put in that work. So
I mean, that's awesome. Where's your path leading you on May 13th? Do you know what you're doing? Are you going to get? Oh, you know what? I know your match.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be you and Jason Breed and Gary Jackson versus the LA Hustlers. Oh, who's the third member of them?
I think it's
Is it
Big
Joe
Joe
Helms?
Helms of
It's
the
Joe Helms.
Dogtown Underground.
I just listened for like 2 hours about Lucky P. Larson talking about that last night.
Yeah. What was he on?
Why did you want to make your ears bleed, Bobby?
I muted it a couple times.
Well, yeah, you got to mute that guy. But the fact is, I mean, we've been button heads for a long time now. They find every opportunity they can to jump me from behind when I ain't looking. And I think that at May 13th at the Aviator Hotel, the big fan fest, SICW, bringing in, 52 legends. In front of all those legends, me, Gary Jackson, and Jason Breed are going to kick all their asses. We're going to take all their names, we're going to shove in the bucket, and we're going to throw that in the Mississippi River. So, I mean, we're finally gonna really get our hands on it, and you know, you're gonna be able to see that. You're gonna be able to see Bobby D and is it Sean Benson?
Yep.
Doing another thing with Sean Benson.
Get my title back.
The Battle Royal, the Bruiser Brody Memorial Cup Battle Royal. I should have thrown that in, actually. You know, looking back on some of the highlights of my career, I was slapped by the widow of Bruiser Brody when I won the Bruiser Brody Memorial Cup. And at the time, again, it made me angry. But then looking back, that's something to kind of be proud of. That's an accolade, you know? So I was able to be slapped by her and then punched by Jerry Lawler. Almost got punched by Dr. D. David Schultz.
Oh, that would have been bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not John Stossel, though. He might have had to hit me a few times to get me down. But I don't.
Well, just think it. I think that guy got some money out of the deal, so you know, you never know. You could have been.
That's what I hear. And then, but let's talk about that later in the night. Later in the night, it's going to be the big Texan. It's going to be a Tillicon. It's going to be for the SICW Classic Championship. Not only is it going to be a match, it's not going to be just any match. It's going to be a Texas death match with the big Texan locking horns with the Tillicon. And most people don't even know this yet because Herb just put it out. But James Beard, the NWA referee, longtime NWA legendary referee, is going to be the second referee. I don't know if you even know this, Texan. That's what's going to happen.
I do. So I've told this story before, but I locked horns with Attila in Arkansas a few months back. And they had James Beard. He was doing a training for the wrestling organization down there, and he talked about it. And I just snuck in. I was just by myself. I snuck in and I sat down. It was probably about a half hour before he was done. He was doing a seminar, and you know, the show probably had an hour and a half before the show. Actually, the doors would open and stuff. So I snuck in, and he talked about how, you know, he loved roughing main events. But then he realized some of the best matches on the card wasn't the main event. And so he would actually look at the wrestlers that, you know, slide in the locker room, and he would find out where they were on the card. And if he felt like that could be the main event, he changed his name from where he was, and he would make sure he would ref that match. And so he just got done doing that speaking, and I got into the locker room. I got dressed. This two different buildings, so Attila's in one building, I'm in this building, and he's just going around looking, and he comes up to me, he goes, what match do you got? And I said, well, it's me and Attila, we're in the fourth match. And he goes, I'll be right back. And he goes to the booker and has them scratch his name off of where he was, and he made sure that he was my referee that night. Right. So, and we got physical with the ref that night because he was trying to break us up, And Attila might have pushed him. I might have pushed him. Either way, he fell, and then he just DQ'd the whole match. So he knows what he's going to be in for. So I think he personally asked for this
that's
match
why he wants to be the special guest referee on the outside of the ring instead of the one inside.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, this match is. It's going to be crazy because I mean, how do you end this war? And I've actually had phone calls. Herb's been actually some of his friends. Stan Hansen. He called Herb and asked for my information, and JBL's called and asked for my information, just to give me some tips, some advice. And it's how do you end a feud and end it for good? So I mean, it's we've been wrestling.
Well, it's a Texas death match. The answer is in the name of the match.
Right. and that's what we're talking about. Like, but even how do you make this where it's the last of it? I mean, we've been feuding for 8-9 months now. Over the belt, and kind of in a way, he caused me and Gary to lose our belts again to the LA Hustlers. But so in my mind,
yeah, it's weird.
I'm just like role playing.
It's weird how we've kind of been interlocked with that.
Yeah.
The LA Hustlers cost you the belts, and I'm going against them. And then when you guys started this whole thing, you and Attila, that was the night that I bled buckets. And you came out to make the save for me. You were there for me, but not a whole lot of people in that locker room would have been. So I remember that night pretty well, man. Wildfire Tommy Rich was there. So I had a Wildfire on each side, But yeah, I do remember that well. And you guys have been battling in multiple states. You've been battling across multiple promotions, and I think that you're asking yourself questions that everybody will have the answer to on May 13th. Just get your mind in the game, do what you got to do. You know what you want to do. Impose your will and make that dude know that now he's the hunted, and he should be worried.
Yeah.
You have Mr. Lariat there, so you need to show how good yours is.
I do want to mention, though, that thus far, to the best of my recollection, I'm undefeated against you and Attila Khan, and I have your kryptonite. I don't know if I should let everybody know here on the show, but you got that big bad lariat, right?
Right.
Why doesn't anybody duck? I would duck. I would duck.
Well, I tell you, so a lot of people have tried the duck, but so I aim for your throat, and some people try to duck, and that I just knock your head off then, because there's a bunch of people
on the top of the dome.
Right.
On the top of the dome. So then it just becomes like a running forearm wrist into the top of the head.
Well, I've had people try to duck, and then they end up missing some teeth,
Hey. Are you getting personal here? What's this?
I wasn't.
4 teeth in 4 years. Luckily, I can still speak fairly well, but 4 teeth in 4 years tells me that anybody who says wrestling isn't real, all they got to do is see me smile. That's simple.
I do have a question about May 13th, though.
Because they have good stories involved.
There you go.
I have a question about May 13th.
Yeah.
You have your you have your match against the LA Hustlers. Just from my personal observations from filming and editing SICW matches and talking to some of the other wrestlers, and you mentioned that your opponents can make you look bad. The LA Hustlers have a habit of not wrestling at all and just running and staying outside of the ring. How are you going to make it interesting and keep them in the ring?
Well, I mean, I've been where they're at. I know all their tricks. I know that they're trying to get in your head. Most guys don't realize that when they're doing that, they're trying to get you off your game. They know that you walked into that match with a game plan, and they know that if they can stall, if they can stutter step you mentally, then they might get an advantage over you. So I'm just going to make sure that they don't get that advantage because I have been a villain. So I know that villain mindset. And they're not going to be able to get that over on me. And there's two other guys with me. So, I mean, if they want to get down and they want to wrestle and we want to go move for move, we can do that. Or we can just straight up fight. We can go hood with it if that's what they want to do. Ain't no thing to me.
That's awesome. All right, so normally we go about an hour and a half. And it's been a great conversation. We've gone just a slight over this, but I wanted to talk about you possibly retiring this year. Wanted to get to see what your pipe dream was going to be. I think we have a bunch of great shows lined up, and I'm hoping you stick around for it because we got Herb is bringing us back to his home, the Wrestling at the Chase. And that's going to be one hell of a show. And I hope you're part of that. We're going back to the
I
Mac.
hope I am too, man. I know that I'd have to re-up my blood work with the state of Missouri to make that happen. But that's definitely an expense that I would put out to be involved in that and to be able to put that on my list of really great places I've had the opportunity to hone my trade. And
Well, I think it's if you're a St. Louis based wrestler, or if you just love the history of St. Louis, that is like the Mecca. I mean,
it is. It usually is.
Yes, I mean, we got that coming up. We got another Mac show. Of course, this great show at the Aviator. So I just, when me and Nate were talking about who do we want to have on, like, well, it's a no-brainer because I wanted to see where your head was at. Because you had posted that a few days ago on Facebook, and I was like, let's see what Curtis is thinking, I mean, I just, I personally don't think it's time yet.
A lot of the reason I posted that was not necessarily as much for fans. I do want the fans to have the opportunity to see us as many times as they can before we hang them up. There's a lot of my family that hasn't had the opportunity to see me in the second half of my career. Some of them were somewhat supportive early on, when it was a novelty, when it was new to them. But I wanted to kind of throw a shout out there and say, hey, Uncle Tim or some of my cousins, that are still alive, because I don't have a whole lot of family members that either haven't moved away or died. But that was kind of a message to them to say, hey, if you want to see me do this before I'm done doing this, you might want to get to a show live. You might want to hit up SICW and see where you could get to a show. But I've actually got quite a few calls and messages about, people thinking that I'm retiring. I'm just heading into my last chapter. I'm not closing the book yet. I want to tell a good last chapter. That's what my whole career has been leading to, and hopefully my body will keep holding up while I'm able to tell that chapter.
There you go.
I have something for all three of you before we leave. We're sitting at 95. I know when we post this, we'll get our 100th subscriber. We need to do something for that 100th person. And chances are it's probably going to be one of Curtis's fans that are going to be subscribing. So I want to know, will all of you put in a picture and sign it? And then I'll have the production company purchase merchandise from each one of you to send it to whatever fan is the 100th subscriber. And then,
Yeah.
I would say that's a
I'll give it to
no-brainer.
you free of charge. You can get an autograph from me and Wildfire, and we'll give it to you free of charge for that 100th subscriber.
I'm going to subscribe.
What? You haven't subscribed yet, Bobby?
Unsubscribe.
I've been waiting for that Wildfire
So you can do that 100.
Oh, that's awesome.
appreciate
All right,
it.
well,
What merchandise do you have? Because I want to have the pictures and then plus something special from each of you. Like Bobby, I'm going to have the production company order and purchase one of your shirts. Jim, it's a no-brainer for me. I'm going to put in one of your flasks. And do you have a Wild Child sippy cup?
No, but I do have a shirt store that's got various merchandise from bandanas you can buy for your dog to coffee mugs to all kinds of different things like that. But a lot of shirts and different styles of shirts and things. At shows, we just put in an order. We sold out, so we just put in an order. There's a window of when they might get here, and I'm hoping that they'll get here before the May 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'll be up in a couple days, so we have some time. I mean, typically when people subscribe, it goes pretty quick in bunches. So, if anybody's watching at this point, you need to subscribe. Maybe you might want to type it to go into 100 if you want some autographed things from 3 local legends, living local legends of pro wrestling.
And congratulations on the Hall of Fame there, Texan.
Congrats.
Thank you, sir.
You will be a Hall of Famer very soon.
Yeah.
So shout out for that. But anybody that wants to go check out what I'm doing, we just got a new .com. It's wildethings.com, WYLDE. Things is spelled normal. Thought about putting a Z on it, but I think that might have gotten too confusing. So wildethings.com, and that'll take you to our website. You can also get to our shirt store from there. We will be kicking off our podcast at some point again. That's been on hiatus for probably a couple of years now because at the place we were living previously to this place, our neighbors upstairs wanted to walk a lot while we were doing the audio, and that's all that really came through on the audio was squeaking, and kind of derailed that, but we'll be getting back to it at some point. I was actually considering doing something leading into the May 13th show, but I really like what you guys are doing with the Squared Ring podcast, and I'm excited to see more big things from you guys. But before we get out of here, let me throw one more shout out because we're talking about May 13th. We're talking about SICW at the Aviator Hotel. We're talking about Bobby D. Sean Vincent for the Central States Championship. We're talking about the Bruiser Brody Memorial Cup Battle Royal for one of the hottest prizes in all of professional wrestling. We're talking about Curtis Wilde, Jason Breed, Gary Jackson going 3-on-3 with the LA Hustlers. Big Joe Helms of the Dogtown Underground accompanied by Lucky P. Larson. And then in the main event that night, in a Texas death match, you've got Big Texan. You have Attila Khan for all the marbles, the SICW Classic Championship. If you're not there, and the fan best starts at 10 a.m. with over 52 legends. If you're not there, you are not a professional wrestling fan in St. Louis.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
It's a great promo. I'm going to put that as a short.
All right,
The tickets.
Yeah, SICW.org. That's the only thing you felt
we can do to get more people out there. Let's do that.
That's true. That's true. We're in the post. I'll break it. If you guys are in the St. Louis area and you're watching Friday Night SmackDown, we are going to have some commercials in there to talk about May 13th. We're on a billboard in St. Louis.
There are.
What's the name of that? Riverfront Times. We're going to be on the Riverfront Times. So many places, but hey, we can use everyone's help. So if anyone has any other ideas to get the word out, because I've heard if this one goes great, which we all planning for it to be, next year it's just going to be bigger. And I can't wait for this year. So if this year is unbelievable to me, I can't wait until next year. So it's going to be crazy.
I can't imagine bigger than this.
A lot of money and a lot of time have been put into this, so it's up to you fans to make it worth it.
I can't imagine bigger than this. The Belflare Fairgrounds, 2 years in a row, we had probably a dozen legendary wrestlers, and then Herb just keeps topping it. SICW just keeps topping it, and that's what the difference is, man. You got all the other organizations in St. Louis, more power to them. They're doing their thing, and I hope that they're successful, or at least feel successful in what they're doing. But when you come to SICW, it's the last bastion of wrestling at the Chase. I mean, the last connection to Larry Madison, the last connection to Sam Munchnick, and that is the holy grail of professional wrestling in St. Louis, wrestling at the Chase, and we're what evolved from wrestling at the Chase.
There was some of the legends I was hanging out with. I won't say their names, but one of them comes up to me. He goes, "You realize you're working for the last of the Mohicans?" And I said, "I do."
Drop names. Now's the time when you drop names.
Well, he's going to be here next month. Him and his buddy, Purple Haze, is going to go against Flash Flanagan.
For those watching, it was Kevin Sullivan that said that.
Yes, sir. Sure was. Telling her he was the last of the Mohicans. But honestly, thank you for coming on. I know Bobby just left, but I appreciate your story. I think that chapter that you have yet to be written is going to be great. I can't wait to see what it is. Hopefully, me and Bobby's a little part of it. Even Nate can be a little part of it. Because I think you're one hell of a good wrestler. One of the best mic people I've ever met. And I just we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate you having me on. The more ears that we can get to listen and hear about the big shows coming up, and hear about what we're doing these days, the better. So thank you guys for having me. I definitely appreciate it. I look forward to the last chapter, and I look forward to you guys being part of it.
Awesome. All right, so everyone from the Squared Ring, thank you, and you guys have a good night. Don't forget to like, share, comment, do it all. Subscribe, all right? And the 100th subscriber looks like they're going to get some stuff, so be that one. All right, guys. Thank you very much. You guys have a good night.